Okay, let's try that. Okay. I thought it was already on, so good thing. Anyway, good morning. Hi, I am Molly Brinkerhoff, today's worship associate. I welcome to you, old friends and new, young and old. Welcome to those in the sanctuary and those here virtually. You are an essential part of our gathering today. Whether today is your first or your 1,000th Sunday in our midst, I wonder if anybody really has been here 1,000 times. Arthur? Annalise? Maybe. We are stronger because you are with us. We are one of people of many beliefs, many origins, sexualities, and genders. We are all growing, all learning, all loved. Just as you are welcome here. I'm going to start out, but I would like to welcome our guest speaker, Jan Brown. I'm going to give you a little information about her now so we don't have to do it during the service itself. Jan Brown is a retired nonprofit executive and an ordained Presbyterian elder. Jan first moved to Idaho Falls in 1976 and later became the first interpretive naturalist at Harriman State Park when it opened to the public in 1982. Although she spent only 2 years at Harriman, Jan remained in Island Park for 16 more years. First as the co-owner of Lucky Dog Retreat Guest Lodge, and then as executive director of the Henry's Fork Foundation. Over the course of her career, Jan headed 2 nonprofits in Montana and worked as an INL advisory scientist. But she says her soul is most at peace at Harriman State Park and at her nearby cabin. So welcome. Thank you for coming. So we have a few announcements. One other thing I forgot to put on that is Jan will be leaving right after her reflection. She has other commitments to her own church, so we're grateful that she's here today. So just be aware that she's not scooting out on us. But our announcements are, first, our order of service is a little different today since our guest speaker has her own, church commitment, so she can leave early. Joys and concerns and the offertory will be after the reflection, along with a pledge testimonial that will be coming up. At this moment, if you don't mind, please silence your phones. If you are watching us virtually, if you are able, please sign in on the chat box to the right of your screen. This will let us know who is joining us. For joys, sorrows, and concerns, if you are here in the sanctuary, please fill out a piece of paper available by the ushers. And if you didn't email them to the worship team, now is the time to do so. And put them in the chat box so a candle can be lit for you. Again, please indicate if it's a sorrow, concern, or joy. We will be having coffee hour after church today, and if you are interested, join the Philosophical Society to discuss philosophy and to suggest topics for the new year. Are there any other announcements from the sanctuary? Nope, doesn't look like there is. So we will now move into our sacred time of worship. As I ring the peace bowl, take the time to notice your breath. Notice how your breath refills you and calms you. Be conscious of your breath during this time. Our covenant, along with our 7 Unitarian Universalist principles, is our guide to how our congregation will relate to each other and to the world. As I read our church covenant for us all, please recite it with me. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and love, and to help one another. We will now be lighting our chalice, and Victoria will light that for me as I do the chalice reading. And if you have a chalice at home, please light one along with us. So As the Wild Wind Bites by Ben Sewell, let us hold a quiet moment together as our chalice is lit. As the wild wind bites, so does the still flame warm us. As the snow may block our doors, so does the gentle flame bring us out. As the crackling cold air stops our breath, so does the radiant flame draw from us the words we need to give and to receive. Words of greeting, words of comfort, words of solace. Let us gaze upon this, our common flame, so that we remember who we are and what we can do when we are together. And I forgot to do one thing. So we are going to do a read and response. And please turn to page 550, excuse me. And I have to pull my glasses. We belong to the earth. So I'm going to read, and then you guys are going to respond. This we know, the earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth.
This we know, all things are connected, like the blood which unites one family.
All things are connected.
Whatever befalls the earth, befalls the sons and daughters of the earth.
We did not weave the web of life. We are merely a strand in it.
Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves.
So our opening hymn is number 52, Sweet Fields of Autumn.
The
This is called Habitat at Home. Kylie groaned on the sofa. Her best friend Georgia was sick. It was Saturday, and the girls had planned to ride their bikes to Sundale Preserve that morning. But Georgia had a sore throat. Kylie had been looking forward to the trip all week. Sundale was her favorite place to go on weekends. She and Georgia could ride there without a grown-up if they stayed on the bike trail. The park was amazing. It had lots of space for exploring, flower gardens, fields, woods, a pond, and a stream. Kylie loved looking for the animals, fish, birds, lizards, and her favorite, butterflies. There was even a bat box that bats roosted in during the day and left at dusk. In the summer, Kylie would pick and eat wild blackberries, cool her feet in the bubbling stream, and watch turtles sunning on logs in the pond. The animals in the park had everything they needed to live, plants and animals for food, places for shelter and nesting, and the pond and stream for water. Kylie's kindergarten teacher called the Sundale Preserve a wildlife habitat. Earlier in the year, Kylie's whole class had helped plant milkweed in the garden for butterfly food. Last weekend, Kylie and Georgia had seen tiny golden eggs clinging to the leaves of some milkweed plants. She wanted to see if any of them had hatched into caterpillars yet. Unfortunately, Sundale was too far for her to ride without her friend. Kylie had graduated from training wheels more than a year ago, but she had just turned 6 years old last month. Her mom offered to walk with her, but she didn't really want to go without Georgia. So instead, she moped on the sofa. "Why don't you go look for caterpillars in the backyard?" her dad suggested. "We don't have caterpillars in our yard," Kylie said. "How do you know unless you look?" he asked. "But you need milkweed plants for caterpillars," said Kylie, "and we don't have those." "We had caterpillars last year," said Kylie's dad. "Don't you remember they ate up my parsley last summer? I planted extra parsley plants this year just so we could have some for the caterpillars and some for us to eat." Kylie had forgotten about that. Then she got an idea. She would go look for caterpillars in the backyard and also look to see if there was a spot where they could plant their own milkweed to feed the butterflies. Kylie smiled and raced outside. She headed straight for the veggie patch where the parsley was growing. Sure enough, a tiny black caterpillar with a white band around the middle was climbing along a stem. She also spotted tiny eggs the color of butter on the leaves. Then she raced back inside the house. "Dad, can we plant milkweed for the butterflies today so they can have food this summer?" she asked. "Well, I'm pretty sure they already have some food out back. Remember, they loved gathering nectar from the coneflowers and asters last summer. We can plant some milkweed next spring. I think milkweed is what monarch butterflies need for their eggs and caterpillars. We can also put out ripe fruit and see if the butterflies sip from that." "Okay, but could we also dig a butterfly bath and put out some basking rocks?" Kylie asked. She had learned that butterflies like to have puddle parties in shallow pools with muddy edges, and they need heat-holding places to rest and sun their wings so they can warm up on cool mornings. "Sure," he said. "Let's go look for some flat rocks and find a good sunny spot." Kylie was excited. She couldn't wait to create their new backyard habitat for butterflies. The end.
And now we will have our reflection from Jan Brown. We need to sing our children out.
I hope I don't have to do that.
Sorry. All right, what?
This friendly place, love give light to every face. May the kindness which we learn light our hearts till we return.
I'll go back to you. Sorry.
You think this goes up a little or not? All right. Thank you, Molly, and thank you, all of you. I see familiar faces here. It's really a privilege to be invited to talk about one of my most favorite places on earth. I went to your UU website and I saw the 7th principle, which, for those of you who don't remember, is respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are part. And I said, we are part of Harriman State Park. We all think of Yellowstone. We think of all of the national forest sites. But, we have a special place right here, 70 miles away, that if you haven't been there, It's definitely worth going. It's one of those thin places on Earth. As we all know, we're close to the Earth's magma with Yellowstone, and you just really feel it when you're at Harriman. I'm going to introduce the topic of Harriman, but you know, it's just amazing that if you look at today's paper, Jerry Painter has written about Harriman. And I said, well, that's interesting because his emphasis on outdoor recreation in the winter, and we talk about summer recreation, it's really presenting an ethical challenge for us going forward in how much use is appropriate for the park. So keep that in mind as I go through the history a little bit here. For those of you who aren't familiar, there was a wonderful history written by Keith Peterson, who was the state historian for a number of years. And I'm going to quote from some of this, the excerpts from Harriman, from Railroad Ranch to State Park. It's really a wonderful historical summary that was published back in 1991 based on a very extensive history that he wrote. So the Railroad Ranch began simply, really simply. It was in the 1890s where some executives of the Oregon Shortline Railroad, which was owned by Union Pacific, bought into this land, and they basically in 1902 incorporated the Island Park Land and Cattle Company. It was regarded as a cattle ranch, but equally as a sporting retreat. They reserved their hunting and their fishing and their camping privileges basically for themselves and for their guests. Basically, it was named the Railroad Ranch, like I said, because of the owners. But Edward Harriman, who was the owner of Union Pacific, was not one of the original owners. But he did become one eventually. Edward Harriman acquired land for parks. It's not dissimilar to how Andrew Carnegie, gave money for libraries. A quote from him is, "What do you think the public likes best, parks or libraries?" Harriman prompted reporters, assured that most people preferred open space to library buildings. But his children, especially Roland and Averill, inherited his passion for nature. Back in 1899, Edward Harriman's doctor recommended he needed some rest. He actually had a weak heart. He made the vacation, though, into a scientific adventure. What he did is he chartered a steamer and filled it with 30 of the nation's naturalists, scientists, artists, photographers, and they went up to Alaska. The steamer left in May, and they spent 2 months following the coast, and they made some of the most important discoveries on that excursion that really were significant at the time. John Muir was one of the passengers on that steamer, and he became a very close friend of the Harrimans. And many people don't know that he, subsequent to that that expedition, visited with the Harrimans at many of the properties they had. And right before his death in 1914, it was 1913 that Edward Harriman had passed without ever having to get to see the park. But Mary Harriman, his wife, brought the 3 youngest children to Harriman. And John Muir visited them. And the very last journals that he wrote, entries that are in his archive, are from his 10 days spent in Island Park. And so, to me, it's interesting. I'm just going to depart for a moment, because one of my favorite quotes of John Muir is, into the forest I go, to lose my mind and find my soul." And I feel that way when I go to Harriman. Maybe some of you do too, especially when I'm hiking the trails alone. And well, back to the history. The youngest son, Roland, reminisced that it was a matter of love at first sight for all of us. The glorious scenery and weather, the fishing, the hunting, the horseback riding, and learning the lore of cattle handling all combined to lure us back there summer after summer. In a way, romance surrounded the railroad ranch because it was so exclusive. It lured the Eastern owners year after year. They essentially escaped their business pressures. They mingled with the ranch hands. They herded cattle. They acted like Western cowboys. Yet it was also a working ranch, and part of the history of Harriman is the manager after manager was expected to try to turn a profit on a cattle ranch, but everyone knew that they really also wanted to care more about the property as a sporting retreat and eventually as a swan preserve. It happened after all this research that Keith and Mary did that there was never a year it turned a profit. Oh well. Ultimately, Roland and Averill's decision to donate the railroad ranch to the state of Idaho, it really reflected the philanthropic lessons from their father and their mother. He wrote, again, this is a quote, "We gave the Idaho property because we just could not face the prospect of it becoming nothing more than an uncontrolled real estate development with hot dog stands and cheap honky-tonks, and because we could foresee the necessity for preserving such property for the enjoyment of future generations." So it's in 1961, I suspect when the tax laws changed, that Governor Smiley at the time started to negotiate with the Harriman brothers about a donation to the state. At the time, the newspapers were very suspect because the governor would disappear and go to New York with no explanation during these times. The Idaho Statesman had a really great editorial I read, just wondering what he was doing. But in the end, it was a huge donation. Essentially, the Harrimans, number one, requested that it be called Harriman State Park of Idaho because they had given a very large piece of property in New York as well. That was Harriman State Park, the first one. There were several conditions in the gift agreement, though, that I want to articulate because they really are the essence of my reflection here. The park's lands, which the core property is well over 4,000 acres, it was to have 10,000 or more additional acres of national forest that must be managed as a wildlife refuge with no hunting or trapping permitted. Now, the Harrimans couldn't dictate to the federal government what to do with that property, but it really is a gentleman's, as they say, agreement with the National Forest that the Harriman Wildlife Refuge, which is over 16,000 acres, was established up to the top of Thurman Ridge. A year-round sanctuary for waterfowl must be maintained on the railroad ranch section of the Henry's Fork, particularly to protect the wintering grounds of the trumpeter swan. And we'll get to that. Fishing within the park must be restricted to fly fishing only. Property taxes must be paid to Fremont County in perpetuity, but at the 1961 assessed valuation. The little known fact is that a senator from Fremont County was the only one who voted against the gift agreement. I don't think he thought they were getting enough. But anyway, all revenues from grazing leases, activity fees, etc., must be retained by the park. They cannot be used elsewhere in the state. They actually dictated that a land exchange program be pursued with the Forest Service to develop more manageable land units and to resolve any boundary issues. So that continues to be a goal. And then finally, a professionally staffed park service must exist to manage Harriman State Park of Idaho. At the time, in 1961-63, there was no Department of Parks and Recreation. It existed, the few parks we had were under Department of Lands, which many of you know must be managed for profit to benefit public schools. So this condition led to the formation of Idaho Parks and Recreation Department in 1965. Many people don't know that because we didn't have a university program for parks and recreation, that most of the managers for the first parks department came from Sacramento State. Anyway, the original agreement was for the property to become Idahos at the deaths of Roland and Harriman, Roland and Gladys and Averill. But when they could no longer visit the park, Roland and Gladys became unable to visit any longer. They decided to move that timeline up, and they gave the park before their deaths. It transferred in April 1977. And then it took another basically 5 years to sell the Montana property that was part of the gift, and then to do all of the infrastructure development. What's interesting to me is that the value of the park and all of its additional lands were used to leverage more than $1 million in land and water conservation funds, which could be used all over the state of Idaho. So just keep that in mind, that the entire park system benefited from Harriman's gift. So this past summer, there was a rededication ceremony for that 40-year anniversary of the dedication. Now, as the park's first park naturalist, I was there at 1982 for all of the grand ceremony. But I had actually been there the year it transferred. My background's in forestry and environmental education, and so I was hired on with the first Youth Conservation Corps that worked at the park that first summer, 2 months after it was transferred over. I want you to imagine what kind of amazing outdoor laboratory I had with those 24 high school students, because we were able to kind of go into this pristine area to talk about botany and aquatics and forestry. It was just, I'll never forget it. I was 23, and it was just the most amazing summer I had ever had, honestly. So let's talk about the natural resources. As you know, the Henry's Fork of the Snake River emerges at Big Springs. It really is the headwaters. 200 cubic feet per second come out of the ground at Big Springs. It's joined by the outlet for Henry's Lake, and then it flows into the Island Park Reservoir, and then it comes out below Island Park Dam, through Box Canyon, and then through Harriman. Those 4 miles or so of river are known throughout the world as one of the premier fly fishing rivers in the country, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The most important thing to remember is that in the winter, it largely stays ice-free, thanks to flow releases out of Island Park Reservoir, but even more importantly, there are natural springs, warm springs that are 52 degrees or so, that flow up all the way along. And so, historically, this has been where the trumpeter swan was able to overwinter and feed, whereas most other water bodies freeze up. And back in the 30s, basically, the Canadian-born birds would come to Harriman, and Roland, by that time, realized that they had only counted 64 birds left in the entire Rocky Mountain population of swans. Basically, before 1900, commercial interests had slaughtered most swans for meat and for hat feathers. And so we basically were unaware of the Alaskan flock that did exist way up in Alaska. But as far as the lower 48 states go, we were essentially on the cusp of losing swans. So Red Rock Lakes National Wildlife Refuge was established, but it was really the Harriman's sanctuary on the Henry's Fork that saved the species. Basically, today, those birds are coming into Harriman this time of year. There's several hundred there now. But thanks to the work of Ruth Shea, who I believe is watching the live stream, she's basically has helped as a catalyst for getting the recovery of the species and getting those Canadian birds to distribute all the way down through Utah down to New Mexico. It's a wonderful story of restoration of a species. But there is a local subpopulation of birds called the tri-state population that nests in the greater Yellowstone area. And that's the population that has been very difficult to recover because swans require lots of security for their nesting. And so over the years, since Ruth has been active starting in the 1970s, she has identified all of the successful nests and the cygnets, the baby swans that have come off. And basically, she has concluded that Silver Lake inside Harriman and the associated nests on Swan Lake are the most important habitat for local swans in the entire greater Yellowstone ecosystem, including Yellowstone Park. So Harriman basically has produced more cygnets during at least Ruth's study time than all the other nesting sites combined. I don't know if we recognize what that really means. As far as we love Harriman as a recreation site, but it is a critical for not just nesting, not just overwintering of the Canadian birds, but Golden Lake has been determined as one of the most important molting sites. For about 25 days in the summer, early summer, the birds lose their feathers and cannot fly. And so any bird that is not nesting, has been unsuccessful, or young birds, are congregating up at Golden Lake early because it's secure, there's no motorized disturbance, and it's a great, social area, I guess. But the bottom line is, all of a sudden Harriman again is so important for all of these life stages of swans. So it's also critical habitat for other species. They knew that, Harrimans knew that when they requested this extra 10,000 acres of forest land. It contains prime elk calving area, habitat, as well as moose calving and rearing. It's got several bald eagle nests. We have also an expanding grizzly bear population. I think people have read about that. I used to hike by myself in Harriman all the time, and I will not do that anymore in the backcountry, which I regret, frankly, but that's part of the deal. There are now at least one verified den site within Harriman Wildlife Refuge for bear. Interestingly, this summer I learned that Harriman East, which is the property downstream of Osborne Bridge, kind of to the east, is now prime habitat in the spring for bears for eating ground squirrels, which I'm happy about, frankly, right? Because my cabin's close by. But, honestly, there are all parts of that park that are such critical habitats now for certain species. Part of the Harriman property is over the ridge, over at Sheridan. Half of it's under water, under the reservoir. But that Sheridan Creek area that does have grazing is also the most important nesting site for curlew, I found out from Fish and Game. So all of a sudden, it's more and more important than we recognize that Harriman as a wildlife refuge is truly paramount. I mean, it attracts so many birders and photographers, from hawks to osprey are there, the majestic sandhill cranes, great blue herons. It's really one of the few places you can see great gray owls because they're out in the daytime. And if you've ever seen one, I mean, they're huge. It's really an amazing bird. You have abundant waterfowl on the lakes, the creeks, on the river. It's no wonder that the gift agreement emphasizes, first and foremost, the wildlife habitat, and then speaks to appropriate levels of horseback riding, of hiking, of having some concessions, to accommodate the public. But it's not the first and foremost thing in that gift agreement. So 45 years now after that transfer, 40 years after the dedication, we know that the Harriman grandchildren are still watching if the state is living up to the terms of the agreement. And there have been a number of internal and external challenges over the years. Those of you might remember some of these things. In the year 2000 or so, the Idaho Parks and Recreation Board actually entertained the idea of a private fishing lodge inside the park that would be very exclusive, would be right on the river, for the exclusive use of certain anglers who would pay a very high price for that experience. A few years later, Governor Otter proposed to eliminate the entire Department of Parks and Recreation in favor of putting all the parks under the Idaho Department of Lands again. I mean, as you remember, many of you know the Department of Lands is governed by our elected officials, so it's a highly politically motivated agency. There was a time a few years ago when one of the state legislators proposed to eliminate the bipartisan Idaho Parks and Recreation Board that's required under the agreement, that the board actually hires and oversees the director of the department rather than that person being a governor appointee. Now, each threat was turned aside as once people pointed out that this would violate the terms of the gift agreement to make it a political entity. Many of you know that the park already limits significantly the use of motorized vehicles. You can just drive in a mile or so. But what's really important now is that we have an increasing number of non-motorized uses. We have mountain bikers that didn't exist when the gift agreement was drawn up. Horseback riders who are together causing significant trail impacts and user conflicts. And in the winter, we have a number of, classic and ski trails that are groomed, but Harriman's trying to accommodate the fat tire bike users as well as the snowshoers, all on the same trail. And that's what Jerry Painter talked about in today's Post-Register. We know that unlimited use is affecting the recreational experience for some of us, but a full assessment of the wildlife and the habitat impacts has really yet to happen. It's fortunate there is a nonprofit organization called the Friends of Harriman State Park, and for full transparency, I am the treasurer. It's growing in size, and we have just decided to launch a 5-year Trails Initiative to take a serious look. Now that the park has been fully discovered, they're even having now high school cross-country meets in the fall at Harriman to run the trails. 400 kids this fall. We need to take a look at it. So the Friends were formed about 11 years ago, right when Governor Otter had proposed his, land, moving the department to the Department of Lands. We knew it would violate the gift agreement, and Governor Otter backed off the proposal. But later, the Friends group raised $750,000 to replace the bridge over the Henry's Fork. Let me just show you for a second. I have 3 of these, I'll leave them up here, but there was a bridge that was condemned, and the department didn't, over the river, that the fishing public really used a lot, and bikers. And the park department couldn't see that as a priority, and so we did raise the $750,000 to replace it. And fortunately, very fortunately now, it's been adopted by the department, and they'll maintain it. So over the next 5 years, I'm hoping that we will do an assessment of the habitat and the trail conditions. And so stay tuned for how we can use our resources to hire independent contractors and then write reports that all agencies, Fish and Game, Forest Service, and the Parks Department can use to really look at the trails and their use. So I think the ethical questions that we have to address now, as we are collective stewards of the park, so each one of us has a part to play here. It would be very easy to love to death this park, very easy. Roland believed it 60 years ago. He actually wrote that he thought that Yellowstone Park was overrun, and that was in the 60s. So are we ready to face regulations with respect to our recreational trail use? Or perhaps face entrance limits? to a very popular state park? Are we willing to sacrifice our freedoms and pay more fees in favor of protecting truly essential wildlife habitat? To what extent should we allow public recreation and our lodging accommodations to take precedence over maintaining environmental quality and preserving solitude? I think John Muir had it right when he said, "Thousands of tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilized people are beginning to find out that going to the mountains is going home, that wilderness is a necessity, and that mountain parks and reserves are useful not only as fountains of timber and irrigating river, but as fountains of life." Amen to that.
Ours is a welcoming community where we find connection, a spiritual community where we find meaning. Ours is a sharing community where our joys are amplified, a caring community where our sorrows are lessened. We take this moment to reflect on our joys and sorrows and acknowledge the mutual support of our community. So, do we have... What's that? Oh, thank you. I didn't realize they were right up there. Let's see. I'm going to check our online first real quick. Okay, no one there. So, let's see. We have a sorrow from Anonymous. May those who do not have enough find abundance. May those without support find those to support them. May tomorrow be easier than today, though the wisdom we gain through hardships. Okay, we have 3 joys here from Karen Schaefer. Layla's left hip surgery and recovery is going well. Bob, her husband's elbow pins have been surgically removed, and he is happy this is done before ski season. And their son Merrick is recovering from COVID, and he tried so hard to avoid. a joy from Victoria. These are all the same ones that we had. Yeah. Do we have any new ones today? These are, I'm like, these sound all really familiar to me.
I just lit 2 candles.
Yeah, okay. I'm thinking, these sound really familiar to me. I still feel joyful. I think I read them, the couple, so I'm probably the one that left them on the counter there from a couple weeks ago. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, from Cindy and Rob. Ooh, they have a sorrow. Sadness over what happened last night at Club Q, extending heartfelt condolences for the dead and families, and strength to the injured. Yes, I heard about that. It's terrible. Judy Stanley has a joy. Amazing Beauty in Idaho and Jan Brown. And another joy are Anita and Layla are on the mend. From Pam, a joy. Welcome to our guest speaker, Jan Brown. Welcome back, Dennis Jorgensen. And welcome, Katrina, who is a visitor today. A joy from Rosie. Jim and I will be driving to Kanab, Utah to have Thanksgiving with our daughter, Michelle. Safe travels. Diana Klinger, a concern. Please keep my mom in your hearts that her thyroid surgery yesterday was successful. We certainly hope so. And then a concern from Vic Allen. My ex-son-in-law, Travis, is in a Boise ICU in an induced coma as a result of severe pancreatitis. So we wish him well and hope everything goes well. Are there any others? There were none I can see on there. And we light one more candle for those who are not. Are there any more candles? Nope. That's okay. We like to have them full. We do. So we'll here light that candle. There you go. For all the joys, concerns, and sorrows that we hold in our hearts that we are just not ready to share at this moment. So thank you, Victoria. And we are now going to have a little testimonial from Diana, in regards to our pledge drive, which has started. So.
Okay, so I have to start out, I was really nervous. I mean, I still am. But I like to look around and see all the familiar faces and some new friends. But yeah, I'm sad that Jan had to leave because I just love her. And I thought I was going to go first before her, and I was like, I'll be your best hype man. I'm going to talk you up. She's in our local Democrat group, and she always just has the best topics to talk about, and I really like her. And I told her, I'm going to call you a local treasure, like Harriman Park, and she missed it. Maybe she can catch it online. But anyway, when I agreed to this talk on Sunday, I promised Victoria that I wouldn't embarrass this UU institution. I even talked with Vic. I was like, do you ever have to cut a mic or turn off the live feed? But anyway, we'll review the footage. We'll speculate together later. We'll see. So yes, when Victoria asked if I would share what had initially attracted me to this UU congregation, I've been thinking about it all week to see what I feel and gather my thoughts about that. There's a sense of community and connection here, and I really enjoy that. I feel like Chris and I were kind of missing that from our lives. Chris and I both grew up in what we gently refer to as a high-demand religion. It did not leave a lot of room for questions or dissent of any kind. In fact, it was this previous experience with organized religion that had us just completely turned off attending or investigating religion or spirituality for almost 15 years. This is my first talk in front of a congregation in 15 years or more. But it wasn't until I finally started doing some healing and soul searching on my own that I realized your own spirituality belongs to you. No one else holds the key to it. There is no right way. There are many paths to the mountaintop, so to speak. In fact, this was the topic of one of my favorite sermons that Reverend Kevin gave us, many paths to the mountaintop. When I realized this freeing truth, I became a sponge for all the philosophies and ideas that had been forbidden to me before. I was taking in all of the book recommendations like you would not believe. My backlog, I mean, it's out of control. In fact, Elizabeth just gave me an Ursula K. Le Guin book that I have to read now. I'm like, oh my Hannah, just throw it on the pile. But I'm pretty excited about it. It's a good problem to have. Anyways, it was around this time that I met one of your fellow members, Dennis Jorgensen, who is here today. And I'm so happy that he was able to make this. It was at his 73rd birthday party, and he invited me to attend one Sunday with him in exchange for his secret huckleberry spot. I have joked that around here, you have to marry or bribe your way into that kind of valuable information. So how could I refuse? So I was a little wary from past experience, but Dennis told me he identified as a UU Buddhist. I was very intrigued by this idea that you could identify as many different things, but still meet as a congregation and share your ideas and your faiths. So, as a UU Buddhist, he was talking to me about things, and I found in all those voracious readings as of late, I really liked a lot of the truths that resonated with me when I was reading Buddhist teachings, so I was intrigued. I decided to come. I also had a favorable opinion of this UU branch because of your connection with the Idaho Falls Pride and that Black Lives Matter sign out front. I felt that it fit me really well. My first Sunday here felt like everything I had ever wanted in a religion. I mean, it was still very much COVID precautions abounding. I remember there were masks. I didn't ever really see everybody's faces. And there still are. And I remember there was no singing yet. And I remember kind of missing that. I'm so glad that it is back. But I completely understand it. But I still loved that sense of belonging, the sharing of the joys and the concerns. I really enjoy that being a part of a community. Nothing too big or too small to share. In fact, we've shared about kindergarten graduations, the passing of Addie's first childhood pet cat named Possum, and just today about my mom's thyroid surgery. And then when Reverend Kevin got up, and I am massively paraphrasing here, but he said something along the lines of, I don't have all of the answers, but we are just here to help each other in love and service. So similar to one of my favorite quotes by Ram Dass, we are all just helping walk each other home. We need each other. Yes, we need time alone to know who we are, but there are some things about ourselves that we can only learn through our interaction with others. We need to be with other people and to experience life out in the world in order to know ourselves fully. Again, this kind of a sermon was mind-blowing for someone of my upbringing, with that my way or the highway kind of approach. And if you don't follow these steps exactly, you are damned type of feeling. And I am beyond happy for my daughter to be able to grow up free from this mentality. Looking around this room, I see so many faces that have been so welcoming to us. Some have shared stories, trinkets, and smiles with my husband, daughter, and I, and it has all been very appreciated. We have met some wonderful people here. And I had a whole thing about introducing Jan Brown after this. I'm telling you, I told her I was going to be a great hype man, but I did enjoy her message. Harriman State Park is a wonderful gift. I remember growing up and being able to do some cross-country ski trips and just enjoy that beautiful nature. And I definitely agree with keeping it as a gift and a blessing for us. Anyway, I will see you all at the coffee hour socializing that happens afterwards. And thank you for letting us be part of your family.
That was wonderful. So having said that, we say in our church that the offering is a sacrament of the free church. What we mean by that is that we believe it is a blessing to be able to govern and support our religious community ourselves, to make possible by our generosity everything we dream of and do to live out our shared values. Every week we lift up the spiritual value of generosity by taking an offering. And just for everyone to be aware, and I think most are, but we are not supported by anyone but ourselves. We don't get any money from other, unless we get for a grant, I should clarify that, but on a regular basis, we do not get any money from the UUA or anywhere. So we're all on our own. So our plate, then, as it is passed, or every week we lift up the spiritual value of generosity by taking an offering for the ministries of this church. Our plate, then, as it is passed among us, becomes filled with the evidence of that generosity. It is our harvest, gathered in every week for what most nourishes us. The ushers will now come among you to receive the gifts of the congregation, and the morning offering will be gratefully received. So please join me in singing our closing hymn, number 94. Our closing words are from healingforest.org. Come home to the forest, where time goes slow and the breath is mellow, where thoughts find rest and calm comes to nest. Come home to the woods, to be friends with trees and listen to the breeze, to wander through trails and mend your sails. Come home to nature. When your heart is hurting or your soul needs healing, when something feels wrong or you just need a place to belong, the forest awaits. Come home. Be healed. Please join me in extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.